was on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, boarded an airplane that was attached to a catapult. Minutes later, I'm being launched off the front of the aircraft carrier. Let's get into it. I joined the Navy for the sole purpose of being on an aircraft carrier. I think it was probably the movie Top Gun that got me interested in it. Even though I knew I was probably never going to be a pilot, I just wanted to work around airplanes and I wanted to be in the Navy. I wanted to do that job of hooking up the plane to the catapult and launching those things in the air. So I set my mind to it, and that's exactly where I landed. So I spent a lot of time because when I checked on board the USS America, that ship was preparing to go out to sea. Like, it had just returned from a cruise. And as the cruises go, there's like your ship is attached to a fleet of ships. And then there are many fleets, and the fleets all do the rotation. So the fleet you're on might be in rotation for a med cruise, and then another fleet might be going to the North Atlantic, and another fleet might be going down to the Caribbean. And I don't fully understand it all, but there's a lot of movement going on there. So there are times where you get back from being out to sea, and then you're just kind of like tweaking everything on board the ship. And I checked on during the time that they had just come back from a cruise. So there was just a lot of workups to do. And it was a good thing for me because getting used to the ship before you go out to sea is a way of easing into it. So I spent a lot of time being shown around and kind of being introduced to how things work without ever having to actually do anything. You can't launch airplanes from the dock. You got to be out to sea doing that. So eventually we did kind of get everything ready. A few months had passed and we were on our way out to sea. Now, here's the thing about being out to sea. Compared to being docked, you're working kind of a regular job when you're docked. You're just working like a 8 or a 10-hour day or whatever. And then you just kind of get off the ship and go do whatever it is you want to do. check back on board and show up to muster the next morning, and you're good to go. Kind of a regular routine. But when you go out to sea, there's nothing like that going on. One, you can't check off the ship because you're in the middle of the ocean. And two, you are there to do a job. That job is to do workups and to practice and practice and practice over and over again. Training for war. That's what you're training for. And they work you so hard. They condition you so much to do this job that they know you can do it tired. They know you can do it hungry because they've prepared you for it. So the job was a little intense like that. I had made my way into V3 division, which was the catapults and arresting gear. Me specifically on the catapults, and more specifically yet on the bowcats. Like that's my dudes right there, bowcats. And so you get assigned so many different things. You're always staying busy. In addition to hooking up a $65,000 fighter jet to an aircraft carrier and launching that over and over as all the jets come rolling up, and you send a whole bunch of jets. Like, you feel like you just did one of the most important jobs in the world, and you did. But then when you're done, you wrap up, put everything away, those jets are going to go out and do maneuvers, and they're eventually going to come back, land, refuel, you're going to launch them again. But you might have a little downtime between that launch and the next launch. But you go down below decks, and your chief's waiting on you. You got stuff to do. More important stuff. Like, you got to mop. You gotta clean the head. No time for go chow, no time for resting. You got to get back to work. So as you can imagine, you eventually start getting really, really tired. And so you start looking for ways to catch a little sleep here and there. You start looking for opportunities, and then you catch on that other people have already kind of figured this out. One of the ways that you catch a little bit of sleep, because we're all assigned spaces, and the spaces is just like compartments or the restroom or break room or pump room, like all these different spaces. You're assigned a space, and you're responsible for keeping it clean. So if you come down below decks and you're like, okay, go clean your space, then you go and you get it clean, make sure everything's good to go, then it would pass a surprise inspection. Well, if your space is clean and you check it, everything looks good, then you can maybe take a little downtime because they think you're in your space cleaning. Now, you're not going to go in your space and get your downtime, because if they're looking for you, they're going to come to your space. So the trick is to go to somebody else's space, somebody else, and you go in their space, maybe unlock a hatch, open the door. It's just an empty room with maybe a pump in it or something like that. You close the hatch, turn it, and you can lean up against the wall and get yourself a little bit of sleep. And if they're looking for you, they're not looking in somebody else's space. So that's the perfect way to do it. But inevitably, you might be sleeping in somebody's space. But when they come to clean that space and you're sleeping in it, you're just like startled awake. And then the first question you ask is, oh, is this your space? Because I'll get out of your way so you can do your thing. Everybody knows the gig. But at some point, you start getting tired and things start overlapping a little bit. In addition to all the jobs you have to do, you also assigned a rotation on the watch schedule, which means you might get done working, then go clean your space. And then when it's time to go to bed, you get your shower. Now you're on watch duty, and you might have to do a 2-hour watch. And then you do your watch with a flashlight. You just tour. I mean, somebody's awake in that space all the time. It's not everybody sleeping in that compartment. There's always somebody on watch. And so when it's your turn to do the watch, then you walk around with a flashlight and just check spaces and keep an eye on things, make sure everything's going okay. Well, I had a watch one night, and we had all been working so hard. I'm walking around with a flashlight. I do my 2-hour watch. And then you go to, you look on the schedule and you see who's up next to relieve you, because you're going to go wake them up out of their bunk. So we're all exhausted. And I go to the guy, his bunk, that's going to relieve me for my watch, to give him a little shake, wake him up. And he's so tired. I pull back his little curtain, and I'm like, hey, man, give him a little shake. He wakes up so disoriented that he doesn't realize he's in his own bunk. He feels guilty for sleeping, because we all felt guilty for sleeping. So I wake him up, and the first thing he says, is this your space? He forgot he was allowed to sleep, and he was in his own bunk. He's so used to saying, when somebody wakes him up, oh, is this your space? I'm like, bro, you're in your own rack. You're good, man. It's time for watch. That's one of the greatest things. One of the greatest memories I have of being out to sea is just like laughing so hard that you feel so guilty for sleeping, that when somebody wakes you up in your own rack, you feel like, oh, I got caught doing something wrong. So we spent a lot of time. I did the Caribbean and North Atlantic and did med cruises. And a couple of times I had to, to go back. One time I had to go back to the States. Had orders to go back to the States in the middle of a cruise. And I had never, this was the first time I had orders to go back to the States in the middle of a cruise. And we ended up in the Caribbean. And then, you're on a need to know basis with the Navy, with the military in general. So it's not like they give you an itinerary on this date at this time, you will be doing this. No, you're just kind of told as you need to know. So I knew I was leaving. I knew I had orders to go. And so I had my sea bag packed and I just had to be at the ready. Well, then the next thing I know, we're pulling into the Caribbean. We're dropping anchor to go to St. Thomas. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe they're just going to give me, my orders here in St. Thomas. They'll probably take me over to Puerto Rico and fly me back. So I thought for sure I wasn't even, I would just be handed my sea bag and leave from Puerto Rico. It made the most sense. So spend a little time goofing around St. Thomas and then check back on board, 10 o'clock at night or something like that. And I realized that like, man, they never got a hold of me. They never gave me any orders. And maybe it'll happen the next day. Well, the next day, sure enough, we wake up, the ship is moving. I'm like, you can tell, you can feel that like things you can't see because when you're down below, there's no windows right where you're at. Like, but we're moving. Like, why are we moving? I thought for sure they were going to send me over to Puerto Rico. Nope, we're moving. So I go talk to the chief. I'm like, did you hear anything? No, I didn't hear anything. I said, Chief, we're moving. I'm like, I've got orders to go back to the States. He's like, yeah, you know how they work around here. So next thing you know, we're getting fully up to speed and we got calls to go do flight ops. I'm like, we're getting ready to start launching airplanes? That's the wildest thing ever. So I go muster up on the flight deck, start getting my gear on and everything, start getting the catapults ready. And I'm like, man, I wonder when they're going to send me back. While I'm setting up the catapults, somebody comes up and tells me, go get your sea bag. You're leaving. I'm like, what? I'm setting up this catapult for my launch. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never been launched off of a catapult before. I have hooked up a lot of planes. I've seen this done over and over again, but I've just never been on one. So I get my sea bag and haul it back up to the flight deck and walk on board this C-2 cod. It's a prop plane. We call it our mail plane because it does bring us our mail out to sea, but it also has 25 seats in the back of it. All 25 seats face the rear of the plane. And to get on board, this hatch comes down and you walk up the ramp and then the hatch would close again. And so I've launched this particular plane off probably hundreds of times. I've seen it a lot. And I was just like, wow, I get to get on this thing. So as I'm boarding it, all my friends are just like, giving me a hard time, just like guys do. Well, one of the things about being on the flight deck is that if you work on the flight deck, you are permitted to call what's called a suspend. It's where you cross your arms and throw them up in the air. And if anybody crosses their arms and throws them up in the air, that is the sign for suspend, and that means this launch is getting shut down. It will not go any further. It does not matter who called that suspend, and that is a safety measure for all of us to be able to see something unsafe, and it's so loud up there. It's not like you can say, hey, you got to throw your hands up in the air, and then they'll shut down the launch. And of course, we've called suspends before, see something unsafe, see something out of place or whatever. And it's okay. Nobody's going to grieve you for calling a suspend, even if it turned out to be nothing. It's better to be safe than sorry is the whole thought process on that. So all my buddies are saying, you're not going to get off this flight deck. So we're just going to keep calling suspends over and over and over again because I can't get in trouble for it. I'm like, oh my gosh, don't do that. I'm going to be stuck on this plane for hours. I've got enough anxiety as it is. Like, I've done this launch. I've seen and hooked up these planes before so many times. But to be on board this plane, I started having like a little anxiety. Like, oh my gosh, I'm glad to be doing this. This is going to be an amazing story. I get to tell the rest of my life. But to tell this story, I got to go through it. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do that part. I was second guessing a lot, but I'm in the military. It's not like I can say no or I change my mind. It's not a ride at the fair, It's not a ride at an amusement park. This is my job. So we walk up on board. We sit down in one of these chairs, and then you buckle in with like this ring in the middle, like 4 harnesses, like just come over and snap into this ring right in the middle. And so it's like a race car harness or something like that. And I'm thinking, that's pretty wild. But also, they handed us a vest. We wore those vests on board the ship. While we're working on the flight deck, we always have the same vest on. But this vest, it has 2 CO2 cartridges in it. And the purpose of it is if you fall in the water, you get to pull this strap and the CO2 cartridges will fill up the vest. Now you have yourself a life vest. It made sense when we're working on the flight deck because planes turn and the exhaust, and you can get blown right overboard without even realizing it's getting ready to happen to you. So it made sense because the risk of falling in was pretty high. But I'm getting on board this plane and we're handed the vest. So I put it on, button it up, sit down, harness myself in, and the flight attendant. I'm calling him the flight attendant, but if he were watching this podcast, he would be like, don't call me a flight attendant. I work in the Navy, but I called him the flight attendant to my buddies when I was telling this story because he came back to the back of the plane to explain to us the procedure for this launch. And what he started out saying was, okay, guys, we're getting ready to get hooked up to this catapult. The engines are going to go full throttle. And at some point, they're going to hit the launch button and we're going to take off going all the way down this catapult. 100 yards this catapult is. And at the end of the 100 yards, we're going to drop off the bow of the ship. You're going to feel the plane start to sink down a little bit and then pull right back up again. And we'll be off on our way to our destination. All that made a lot of sense to me. I knew the plane dropped down a little bit, seen it do it hundreds of times. Then he goes on to tell us, he said it like this. He said, take a look at that hatch above you. We looked up, and there's a hatch with a wheel and everything to open it up. And I'm like, wow, I didn't notice that hatch when I first sat down. He said, that hatch is where we're all going if we land in the water. And I'm like, oh, the reality of this whole thing has just hit me. We could crash this airplane into the water. And I was like, I got my chest, can't breathe. But then I started settling into it. Well, I guess it's good to know where we're going if we land in the water. So the plane gets hooked up to the catapult. I can hear the engines full throttle. Wow. Now we're feeling the anxiety, and I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing all my buddies out there. They didn't call us to spin, but they all gave me the finger. So I'm looking around, giving them the finger back out the window, And sure enough, just like he said, guy standing on the catwalk, he's responsible for hitting the button and he waits for the orders to hit it. Everybody does their final checklist, and I see his hands go up and I see his hand reach down. He pressed the button, and buddy, it was amazing. It was the most exciting thing I had ever done to that point. Taking off, holding on. You feel it rushing down the flight deck. All of a sudden, you feel the drop. We're not on board ship anymore. We're airborne and we're dropping. And then, just like he said, we pulled up nice and pretty, got leveled out nice and high, and it felt amazing being launched off an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.